Hello, everyone. I'm Elena, your host, and I am absolutely thrilled you've joined me again today for an incredibly insightful journey into a vital aspect of natural English communication. If you've been following our English Fluency Journey series, you might recall we briefly touched on expressing opinions and polite disagreement in episode 1. Today, we're taking a deep dive transforming that foundational knowledge into what I truly believe is an ultimate masterclass. This is episode 2 of our journey, meticulously designed to give you every tool you need to speak your mind with grace, confidence, and genuine impact. Today's topic is something I think every English speaker, no matter their level, grapples with: how to express your opinion politely in English. It's not just about knowing the right words, it's profoundly about navigating subtle social dynamics that help us connect, show respect, and communicate effectively, especially when strong feelings or disagreement are involved. This skill truly elevates your English to confident, thoughtful, and emotionally intelligent interaction. Have you ever held back from sharing a vital opinion? Unsure how to phrase it respectfully, or worried you'd sound too blunt? Perhaps you spoke, but later wished you'd worded it more gently. Oh, if that sounds familiar, you are in exactly the right place today. In this comprehensive masterclass, we're going to break it all down, step by practical step. We'll cover everything from gracefully introducing your opinion to disagreeing without confrontation, inviting others' views, and ultimately projecting an aura of confidence and politeness in any setting. So go ahead and grab a substantial cup of tea and a notebook. Settle in comfortably. By the end of this episode, my sincere goal is for you to feel completely equipped, empowered, and truly confident to express your thoughts respectfully and naturally in any English conversation, whether professional, academic, or casual. This episode is thoughtfully designed to give you the practical tools for all of it. To truly master polite expression in English, we first need to gain a deeper understanding of the underlying cultural and social reasons why politeness plays such a pivotal, fundamental role in English communication. You see, it's not just about being nice in a general, superficial sense. It's actually deeply embedded in the social fabric of many English-speaking cultures. In many of these cultures, particularly in professional, academic, or any unfamiliar social settings, being overly direct can very often be perceived as rude, aggressive, demanding, or even outright disrespectful. This bluntness can unintentionally create barriers between people rather than building bridges of understanding and connection. Let's illustrate this with a simple, everyday example. Imagine for a moment that you walk into a coffee shop. If you were to simply say, "Give me a coffee," it is, of course, grammatically correct. Absolutely. But culturally, it conspicuously lacks the expected level of politeness. This bluntness might inadvertently make the barista feel uncomfortable, or as if you're being impolite, creating an awkward interaction. Instead, consider how much more smoothly the interaction flows if you say, "Could I please have a coffee?" Or, "I'd like a coffee, please." Or even a simple, "May I have a coffee?" These seemingly small additions of could, would, may, and please completely transform the entire interaction. They demonstrate respect for the other person's role and autonomy, fostering a more pleasant exchange. Now, let me be absolutely clear: being direct isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it is absolutely essential and even preferred. Think about emergencies. Imagine yelling, "Call an ambulance," or "Look out." In such critical, high stakes moments, directness can literally save lives. Also, among very close friends, A certain level of directness can actually signify intimacy, honesty, and a comfortable familiarity. In such contexts, over-politeness might even sound sarcastic or strangely formal. In some very specific professional contexts, like giving precise instructions in a high-stakes, time-sensitive situation, such as in an air traffic control tower or during a surgical procedure, directness is paramount for clarity and safety. However, for the vast majority of daily conversations, social interactions, and professional exchanges, people in English speaking cultures typically prefer to soften their speech. This thoughtful approach makes communication feel more respectful, more harmonious, and generally more pleasant for everyone involved. It actively facilitates smoother interactions and significantly reduces unnecessary friction or tension. Let's really visualize this with another scenario. Imagine a team meeting where a colleague proposes an idea you don't entirely agree with. If your immediate, unfiltered response is, "That's a terrible idea, it won't work. We tried that before, and it failed," you might be factually right in your assessment. But the delivery is harsh, dismissive, and potentially humiliating for the other person in front of their peers. This bluntness could easily shut down the conversation entirely, make your colleague defensive, and even damage your working relationship in the long run. Now consider a thoughtfully constructed alternative response. I understand your point about that approach, and I genuinely appreciate you sharing it with us. However, I'm not entirely sure that particular strategy would be effective given our current resource constraints and some of our past experiences with similar methods. Perhaps we could consider an alternative like focusing on option B, which might offer more flexibility and potentially a clearer path forward. Notice the profound difference. You're expressing the exact same underlying opinion that you don't think their idea will work, but you're doing it in a much more polite, constructive, and even collaborative way. You've actively acknowledged their contribution, showing respect before gently introducing your reservation and offering an alternative. This mindful approach to politeness offers so many tangible benefits. Firstly, it significantly helps to build rapport with others. When you speak respectfully, you establish a mutual understanding and trust, which genuinely strengthens relationships, whether personal or professional. Secondly, it drastically reduces the potential for conflict. By softening your tone and phrasing, you avoid putting others on the defensive, making disagreements less likely to escalate into heated arguments and more likely to remain constructive discussions. Thirdly, and crucially, it makes people more likely to listen to you and genuinely respect what you're saying, even if their initial opinion differs from yours. They feel heard and valued, which opens their mind to your perspective. It also makes you sound more professional, more sophisticated, and frankly, more emotionally intelligent. And here's a wonderful bonus for you, the speaker. When you know exactly how to express yourself politely, when you have these essential tools readily available in your linguistic toolkit, you actually feel more confident doing so. You remove the apprehension and fear of accidentally offending someone, allowing you to articulate your thoughts more freely, clearly, and effectively. So now that we deeply understand the why, let's dive into the very practical how to. One of the first and most effective things you can do to express your opinion politely is to use soft, respectful phrases to simply introduce your viewpoint. In English, we often rely on these gentle lead-ins or hedging phrases. They are like subtle verbal cues that signal you're about to share your personal viewpoint, your interpretation, or your suggestion, rather than stating an absolute, undeniable truth. This subtle linguistic shift is incredibly powerful because it implicitly invites others to share their perspectives too, fostering a more open, less confrontational discussion where everyone feels comfortable contributing. Let's explore some of the most common and versatile gentle lead ins. The phrases I think and I believe are perhaps the most common and widely applicable. While I think is generally a little more informal than I believe, both are broadly accepted and understood. For instance, instead of making an absolute statement like, this is the best movie, you can soften it by saying, I think this is the best movie I've seen all year. Or to express a more general conviction, you might state, I believe that continuous learning is absolutely essential for long term career growth in any field today. For a slightly more assertive but still polite opinion in a professional context, you could say, I think we really need to address this issue urgently before it escalates further. As a nuance to consider, using phrases like, I honestly think, or I genuinely believe, can add a layer of sincerity and conviction, but it's best to use them sparingly to avoid sounding overly emphatic or even defensive. Moving to slightly more formal options, in my opinion, and from my perspective, are excellent choices. These phrases are slightly more formal than I think or I believe, and clearly communicate that what follows is your individual view, which is particularly useful in professional or more structured discussions. For a formal example, consider saying, in my opinion, the new marketing strategy shows great promise, but it clearly requires further testing and refinement. Oh, in a professional discussion, you might express, from my perspective, this approach might be too complex for our target audience given their current level of understanding and background knowledge. As a subtle nuance, the phrase, to my mind, this proposal addresses several key challenges we've been facing for quite some time, offers a more sophisticated alternative to in my opinion. Phrases like, it seems to me that, and it appears that, are wonderfully effective for expressing an observation or a tentative opinion, especially when you don't have all the definitive facts or when you want to avoid sounding overly declarative. They suggest that your opinion is based on the available evidence or your current understanding, making it open to discussion. For example, you could say, it seems to me that the team is feeling a little overwhelmed with the current workload. So, introducing a new project right now might be particularly challenging. Or, with a note of cautious optimism, it appears that we're heading towards a positive outcome here, but we definitely need to remain vigilant and adaptable. As a nuance, the phrase, it strikes me that, is another excellent option, often used when a sudden thought or impression comes to mind during a conversation. To add a touch of tentativeness and thoughtfulness, consider, I would say that, I'd suggest, and the more informal, if you ask me. These phrases make your suggestion or opinion feel less like a direct command or an absolute truth and more like a carefully considered recommendation. For example, I would say that consistency is absolutely key for achieving our long-term objectives and maintaining quality. Or, as a cautious recommendation, I'd suggest we start small and test the waters first, perhaps with a pilot program, to minimize any potential risks down the line. In a more informal setting, you might hear, if you ask me, that movie was a bit too long, even though the acting was truly great. Finally, I suppose, and I guess, are excellent for expressing more casual or even slightly hesitant opinions, perhaps when you're not entirely certain, or you simply don't want to sound too firm or overly decisive. They are generally more informal and work very well in everyday conversation. For instance, I suppose we could try that approach if nothing else works, but I honestly have some reservations about its effectiveness. Or in a casual review, I guess that concert was okay, but it definitely wasn't my favorite performance by them so far. A crucial nuance here is to be careful not to overuse these in very formal settings, as they might inadvertently imply a lack of conviction or a casualness that isn't appropriate. Before we dive into our very first strategies, I just want to pause for a moment and extend a heartfelt thank you. If English in Moments has consistently helped you on your learning journey, if you find real value in these lessons and feel they make a difference, please consider subscribing to the podcast. Share it with a friend, a colleague, or anyone you know who might also benefit from these in depth English lessons. Or if you have a spare moment, even leave a review on your preferred podcast platform. Your incredible support truly means the world to me. It is genuinely what keeps this content going strong, allowing it to reach more dedicated learners like you, and enabling me to dedicate the time and effort to create these comprehensive and thoughtful resources. Practical exercise. Take a moment right now and think of a strong opinion you've had recently. Perhaps it's about a new policy introduced at work, a recent news event you've been following, a book you've just finished reading, or even a local issue in your community. Now try rephrasing that opinion using at least two of these soft starts. Say it out loud. As you speak, pay close attention to how different each phrasing sounds and how it feels to express your opinion with these gentle introductions. This is a fantastic, hands-on way to practice and develop this crucial instinct for polite opinion introduction. Now let's move on to something that can feel much trickier, and honestly, it's one of the most important social skills to master in English: how to disagree politely. Disagreement is an inevitable part of human interaction and healthy debate, but how you handle it truly defines your communication style and your relationships. When you find yourself in a situation where you don't entirely agree with someone, the absolute key is to first acknowledge their point of view before you share your own. This doesn't mean you necessarily agree with them. It simply demonstrates respect, indicates that you've actively listened to what they have said, and that you genuinely understand their perspective. This crucial step paves the way for a more constructive, open dialogue rather than an immediate confrontational debate. Let's explore some common phrases for polite disagreement. To acknowledge then counter, you can use phrases that show you've truly heard and processed their statement. These include, "I understand what you're saying, but I see your point, however. That's a valid point, though." Or, "While that's true, I also think." For example, you might say, "I understand what you're saying about the budget constraints, but I have a slightly different take on how we should allocate resources for this project to ensure long-term success." Or, "I see your point about needing to finish quickly. However, I believe we should prioritize quality over speed for this particular project's long-term success and reputation." You could also respond with, "That's a valid point, though. Have we fully considered the long-term implications and potential ripple effects of that decision on other departments?" Or, "While that's true that this solution appears cheaper up front, I also think we need to account for the unexpected variables and potential hidden costs that might arise later." A crucial nuance here is that the "but" or "however" should genuinely follow a sincere acknowledgement. Avoid sounding like you're just paying lip service. Your tone should convey true understanding before you introduce your counterpoint. For softer, indirect disagreement, especially when you want to be even more careful, cautious, or less direct in your opposition, consider phrases like, I'm not sure I completely agree with that, or a slightly shorter, I don't entirely agree. More informally, you might say, I'm not so sure about that. A very polite phrase, often favored in British English, is I'm afraid I don't quite see it that way. For example, I'm not sure I completely agree with that assessment of the market. I think there might be other, less obvious factors at play that we haven't considered yet. Or, I don't entirely agree with the conclusion drawn from the initial data. Perhaps we need more input from various stakeholders before making a final judgment. Informally, you could hear someone say, I'm not so sure about that new restaurant. I heard the reviews weren't great, and I'm a bit hesitant to try it. A key nuance to remember is that the words completely, entirely, and quite are incredibly powerful softening adverbs here. They subtly imply that you agree partially but not fully, which makes the disagreement less absolute and therefore significantly less confrontational. When you need to express formal and respectful disagreement, particularly in highly professional or academic settings, phrases like I beg to differ and with all due respect are highly appropriate. For instance, you might hear someone say, I beg to differ on that point regarding the implementation timeline, given the current resource allocation. This is often used when disagreeing with someone in a position of authority. Or, with all due respect, I hold a different view on the proposed strategy for customer retention, believing it might not address the root causes of customer churn. A nuance is that I beg to differ is quite formal and can sometimes sound a bit old-fashioned in casual conversation, so it's best to use it judiciously. With all due respect is an excellent phrase for setting up a polite disagreement in formal settings, signaling that you are about to present a contrasting view while still maintaining decorum. Disagreement through questions is a very subtle yet exceptionally powerful way to challenge an idea without making a direct contradictory statement. This approach encourages critical thinking and further discussion. Consider asking, perhaps, but have we fully considered the potential risks associated with that rapid expansion strategy? Or you might offer an alternative by asking, what if we approached it this way instead? Focusing on the customer experience first rather than just the profit margin. Another subtle way is to ask, have you thought about the long-term impact on our team's morale if we proceed with this decision? The powerful nuance here is that these questions subtly introduce an alternative perspective or gently highlight a potential flaw, encouraging further collaborative discussion rather than an outright argument. You can also engage in presenting both sides of an argument or situation. This is a sophisticated way to show a balanced view and implicitly disagree with a single-minded or overly simplistic approach. The phrase, on the one hand, but on the other hand, is perfect for this. For example, on the one hand, this new software could be incredibly cost-effective in the short term, offering significant savings. But on the other hand, it may lead to lower quality outputs and require significant retraining costs for our staff, which we need to factor in. Finally, a critical and overarching element for all polite disagreement is focusing squarely on the idea, not the person. This is truly a golden rule for managing conflict. When you're in a disagreement, always strive to shift your focus from attacking or blaming the person to debating the actual idea, issue, or proposal at hand. For example, instead of saying, "You're wrong about that," "You clearly didn't think this through," which blames and attacks the person, try, "I think that might be inaccurate based on the latest data I've seen, and I'm a bit concerned about its implications." Similarly, instead of, "You always overlook the details," which is accusatory, try, "I'm concerned that some details might have been missed in the current plan, and I'd like to clarify them." The key takeaway here is profoundly important. You're debating the idea or the proposal, not attacking the person's intelligence, character, or competence. This distinction is vital for maintaining healthy relationships and productive discussions. Now, let's shift our attention to an incredibly powerful and versatile grammatical tool in English politeness: modal verbs. These include seemingly small words like could, might, may, and would. These small words are truly magical because they effortlessly soften your statements, transform blunt demands into gentle suggestions, and express possibilities rather than absolute certainties. This inherent tentativeness, conveyed through modal verbs, is almost universally interpreted as politeness, consideration, and respect in English communication. Let's break them down. Could is frequently used to suggest a possibility or offer a gentle suggestion. For a suggestion, instead of stating definitively, "We need to do this," you can soften it significantly by saying, "We could look into this option as a potential solution," which immediately presents it as just one possibility among several, inviting discussion. For a polite request or piece of advice, you might say, "You could try calling them again if you haven't heard back yet. Sometimes a follow-up helps." And to express a possibility, "This could be a good solution, assuming we have the necessary resources and approval." Might is used to express a weaker possibility or a more tentative suggestion than could. It inherently implies a degree of uncertainty which contributes to its polite tone. For a tentative suggestion, consider, "That might be a better approach if we're truly aiming for long-term sustainability and not just a quick fix." This is much less definite and prescriptive than "That is a better approach." For an uncertain opinion delivered with humility, you could say, "I might be wrong, but I think this data looks a little off and perhaps we should double check it." This shows openness to correction. May is often used in more formal contexts to express possibility or grant permission, similar to might, but frequently carrying an even greater sense of politeness or formality. For a formal suggestion, we may wish to consider the broader implications of this decision more carefully before proceeding. For a polite opinion or acknowledgement of possibility, "I may disagree with the exact timeline, but I absolutely support the overall goal and direction we're heading." Would is especially helpful for giving polite recommendations, making hypothetical statements, or expressing preferences in a gentle manner. For a recommendation, I would suggest we hold off until next week to gather a bit more information, just to be thorough. For expressing a preference, it would be better if we review this together, perhaps over a call, to catch any potential errors collaboratively. For a hypothetical opinion, perhaps reflecting on a past situation, "I would have thought that was the correct procedure at the time, but clearly I was mistaken, and I've learned from it." Beyond specific grammatical points, another crucial way to add nuance, warmth, and politeness to your statements is by strategically using softening adverbs and adjectives. These softeners inherently reduce the absolute force of your statement, making it sound less rigid and more approachable. Common adverbs include slightly, somewhat, a little, just, perhaps, possibly, rather, and quite. For example, I feel a little hesitant about this decision, as I see some potential challenges that need to be addressed. Or the results were somewhat inconclusive, in my opinion. So we definitely need further analysis before drawing firm conclusions. You might gently interject with, I just wanted to suggest an alternative idea, if that's okay, something a bit different. Or offering a cautious suggestion. Perhaps we could look into that possibility a bit more deeply before ruling it out entirely. Adjectives like a bit and a little also serve this purpose effectively. For instance, I found the presentation a bit fast paced for me to fully absorb all the information. Or, the proposal seems a little ambitious for our current resources, though the vision is certainly inspiring. Tentative language and personal experience are also excellent ways to signal that your opinion is not rigid or stubborn, but rather a thoughtful consideration that is open to discussion, or one that is genuinely grounded in your unique experience. Tentative phrases include, I tend to think, I'm leaning toward, or I'm inclined to believe. My initial thought is, and it strikes me that. For example, I tend to think that a phased approach would be more manageable for our team, allowing us to adapt as we go. Or expressing a developing viewpoint. I'm leaning toward this solution because it appears to address the core issue directly and quite efficiently. You might also say, my initial thought is that we might need a bit more data before making a final decision on this crucial matter. And for a sudden insight, it strikes me that we haven't fully considered the customer's perspective in this plan. For grounding your opinion in experience, use phrases like, from my experience, based on what I've seen, or in my work I've found that. For instance, from my experience, starting small tends to work better for new initiatives, allowing for crucial adjustments along the way as we learn. Or, based on what I've seen in similar projects, this particular path might not be the best route for long-term sustainability due to potential unforeseen costs. Now, here's something many English learners overlook, but it's absolutely vital for truly engaging and productive conversation. Actively inviting others to share their opinions. After you've expressed your view, the conversation shouldn't simply become a monologue. It's crucial to turn it into a genuine dialogue. Asking open-ended questions demonstrates immense respect for others' viewpoints, actively encourages them to speak freely and contribute, and ultimately leads to a much richer, more collaborative discussion. Here are some excellent phrases for inviting feedback. Direct and common questions include, what do you think? And how do you feel about that? For example, after stating your view, you could say, I believe we should proceed with the new software. What do you think? Do you have any immediate thoughts? Or expressing a concern, I'm a little concerned about the tight deadline for this project. How do you feel about that? Is it something you're also considering? For more engaging and open-ended invitations that encourage deeper responses, consider phrases like, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Is there anything else we should consider before moving forward? What are your initial thoughts on this proposal? Where do you stand on this issue? Or, do you have any reservations about this plan that we should address? Informally, you could ask, what's your take on it? For instance, from my perspective, the new policy could really streamline our workflow. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, particularly your insights as a team leader. Or after discussing an option, I'm leaning towards the second option. Is there anything else we should consider before deciding perhaps something I've missed? You might also ask, this project is quite ambitious, so I'm keen to hear. What are your initial thoughts on its overall feasibility? Informally, if discussing a movie, I'm not so sure about that new movie. What's your take on it? Did you enjoy it? Remember, context truly matters when it comes to politeness in English. The level of politeness you use should constantly adapt to the specific situation, the relationship you have with the person you're speaking to, and the overall environment you're in. Using overly formal language with close friends might actually sound stiff, awkward, or even sarcastic, while being too casual in a formal professional meeting could easily be perceived as disrespectful or unprofessional. Knowing your audience and the setting is absolutely key to effective and appropriate communication in formal situations such as business meetings, presentations, academic discussions, or formal emails. It's almost always better to err on the side of caution and use more formal and indirect language. Preferred phrases in these settings include, I believe. From my perspective, it seems to me that, I would suggest, I would argue that, and it has come to my attention that. In these contexts, you should consciously avoid very casual phrases like, I guess, I suppose, what's your take? Or a blunt, no way. For example, in a meeting, you might politely state, I would suggest that we carefully review the quarterly projections before finalizing our budget to ensure accuracy. In an academic discussion, you could confidently articulate, it appears that the data supports an alternative hypothesis, though further rigorous research is undoubtedly needed to confirm this. In informal situations, such as chatting with close friends, family members, or at casual social gatherings, you can definitely be much more relaxed and use more common, everyday expressions. However, politeness is still universally valued. It's just expressed in a more relaxed and comfortable way. Acceptable phrases in these contexts include, I feel like, I'm not so sure about that. I guess, what do you think? And the very informal yet common, my two senses, which simply means my opinion. Even in informal settings, you should still avoid being excessively blunt, dismissive, or rude, as this can still cause discomfort. For example, when chatting with friends, you might say, I feel like that movie was a bit slow, to be honest, even though the ending was surprising. With family, you might ask, I'm not so sure about that plan for the weekend. Maybe we should check the weather forecast first, just in case. Even if you're meticulously using all the right words and perfectly constructed polite phrases, your tone of voice, intonation, and body language carry an immense amount of your message. They are the nonverbal cues that can either powerfully reinforce your polite phrasing or unfortunately completely contradict it. A perfectly polite sentence delivered with a harsh, dismissive tone or accompanied by a dismissive gesture will regrettably lose all its intended politeness and often be perceived negatively. Regarding tone of voice, always strive to speak calmly. Maintain a moderate pace and a measured volume. Avoid rushing your words, as this can inadvertently make you sound agitated, aggressive, or even nervous. Aim for a friendly and open tone. Even when you are expressing a strong disagreement, ensure your tone conveys that you are discussing an idea or an issue, not attacking a person. A warm, open tone genuinely invites continued dialogue and constructive engagement. You should consciously avoid sarcasm, a condescending tone, a dismissive attitude, or a flat, monotone voice, as these can swiftly undo all your careful phrasing and effort. As a practical exercise, try saying the same polite phrase first with a harsh or impatient tone, then immediately with a calm, friendly, and open tone. Actively notice the profound difference in how each sounds and feels. For intonation, when you ask an open ended question to invite an opinion, for example, "What do you think?" let your voice rise slightly at the end of the question. This subtle upward inflection signals genuine curiosity and openness, not an accusation or a challenge. For expressing your own opinion or making a statement, a gentle falling intonation at the end of your sentence can sound confident and assured without being aggressive or dictatorial. Also, make effective use of strategic pauses. A brief, deliberate pause before introducing a contrasting opinion, such as, "I understand your point," brief pause. "However, I see it differently for these reasons," can convey thoughtfulness and give appropriate weight to your words, making them seem more considered and less impulsive or reactive. Your body language also speaks volumes. Try to maintain appropriate eye contact. In most Western cultures, this demonstrates engagement, attentiveness, and respect. However, always be mindful of cultural variations. In some cultures, direct, prolonged eye contact can actually be perceived as challenging or overly assertive. Adopt an open posture by keeping your arms uncrossed and your body generally facing the speaker. This non-verbally communicates openness, receptiveness to their ideas, and a willingness to engage, even if you ultimately disagree. Occasional, gentle nodding while someone else is speaking shows that you are actively listening, processing what they are saying, and following their train of thought, even if you plan to introduce a contrasting opinion later. For facial expressions, aim for a neutral or mildly agreeable expression at the start of a disagreement, coupled with a slight, genuine smile, not a smirk or grin. This can significantly soften your message and make you appear more approachable. Consciously avoid frowning, scowling, or rolling your eyes, as these expressions convey dismissiveness and disrespect. When making your points, use open hand gestures rather than pointing or aggressive, closed gestures to maintain an inviting and collaborative demeanor. Now, what about those moments when conversations genuinely get heated? When emotions run high and disagreements can start to feel very personal? These are the ultimate tests of polite, effective communication, and truly mastering them makes you a truly skilled and composed communicator. The most powerful first step in such situations is to simply stay calm. Take a deep breath. If you need to, count to 3 or 5 silently in your head. Reacting emotionally will almost always lead to regret and can quickly derail any productive discussion. A calm demeanor, even when you feel internal tension, helps you think clearly and prevents the conversation from unnecessarily escalating into an argument. Always, always focus on the idea, not the person. This is a golden rule for managing conflict. When you're in a disagreement, consciously shift your focus from attacking or blaming the person to debating the actual idea, issue, or proposal at hand. For example, instead of saying, "You're wrong about that, you clearly didn't think this through," which blames and attacks the person, try, "I'm concerned this particular approach might not work based on our past experiences with similar challenges, and I have a few questions about it." This phrasing focuses on the plan or issue, not the person, and crucially uses an I statement. Using I statements instead of you statements helps prevent the conversation from becoming a confrontational attack on the other person. You're owning your feelings or observations, not blaming them. For instance, "I feel that the timeline for this project is unrealistic," is much better than "You made the timeline unrealistic. Or, I'm a bit confused by this section in the report, rather than, you didn't explain this clearly. If appropriate, acknowledge their emotion. Sometimes, simply acknowledging that the other person is upset, frustrated, or feels strongly about something can significantly diffuse tension and make them feel heard. You can say, I can see that you feel strongly about this and I appreciate your passion. Or, I understand why you might be frustrated with the current situation. This doesn't mean you agree with why they're frustrated, just that you acknowledge their feeling, which builds empathy. When absolutely necessary, you might need to interrupt politely, especially if the conversation is derailing, becoming unproductive, or if someone is dominating the discussion. Phrases for this include, excuse me for interrupting, but I just wanted to add one quick point here before we move on. Or, may I just jump in for a moment to clarify something? You could also use, if I could just interject briefly, I have a relevant piece of information. Or, pardon me, but I think it's important to clarify something before we go too far down this path. If someone is being unclear or indirect, you can gently request clarity politely without sounding accusatory or challenging. Try asking, could you elaborate on that point a bit more for me? I want to make sure I fully understand. Or, could you explain what you mean by X? I'm not entirely clear on that specific term. You could also say, I just want to make sure I understand correctly. Are you saying that we should proceed with the first option, even with the risks? Finally, sometimes, after you've made your point politely and listened carefully to theirs, it becomes abundantly clear that you simply won't reach a consensus. Knowing when to agree to disagree and gracefully exit the discussion is a true sign of maturity and sophisticated communication. You might say, it seems we have different perspectives on this, and that's perfectly okay. Healthy teams often have diverse views. Or, I appreciate your viewpoint and the discussion we've had. Perhaps we'll have to agree to disagree on this for now and we can revisit it later. Other excellent options include, we might not resolve this today, but I genuinely appreciate the open discussion. Perhaps we'll revisit this another time when we have more information or new insights. Or more pragmatically, let's table this for now and come back to it another day when we've both had a chance to think it over. So, how can you truly put all of this into practice and make these incredibly important polite communication strategies second nature? The answer, as with any skill, is consistent, deliberate practice. One powerful method is conscious observation. Make a conscious effort to watch and listen closely to native English speakers in different contexts, such as TV shows, movies, podcasts, interviews, or real-life conversations around you. Actively pay attention to how they introduce their opinions, how they disagree politely, what specific words and phrases they use, and what their overall tone is like. Beyond just words, actively notice nonverbals by observing their body language, their facial expressions, and their strategic use of pauses. Then, try to subtly mimic these elements in your own practice. Another highly effective technique is deliberate practice and role-playing. Think of specific, real-life situations you encounter often where you need to express an opinion or engage in a discussion. For instance, imagine a scenario 1, work or school. You need to politely disagree with a project deadline that seems unrealistic. Or scenario 2, social. A friend has a strong opinion on a movie or book that you personally strongly dislike. Or scenario 3, family. You want to politely suggest a different plan for a family outing without causing any friction. Before real conversation, Try writing it out by jotting down exactly what you want to say, consciously incorporating the polite phrases and structures we've discussed. This writing practice truly helps build muscle memory for your brain. Then, speak it aloud by practicing these phrases and sentences out loud. If you can, record yourself speaking and then listen back critically. Ask yourself, how do I sound? Do I sound natural, polite, confident? If possible, find a practice partner. This could be a language exchange partner, a trusted friend, or even an English teacher, and get feedback on your politeness and clarity. Regular reflection and self correction are also absolutely crucial for continuous improvement. After conversations where you've tried to apply these skills, take a moment to reflect. Ask yourself, what did I say specifically? How did I say it, considering my tone, intonation, and body language? How did the other person react to my polite approach? Did they seem receptive or did I miss something? And most importantly, what could I do even better next time to refine my communication in a similar situation? You can also keep a politeness journal. Whenever you successfully use a new polite phrase, or conversely, whenever you realize you wished you had used one in a specific situation, write it down. Note the context, the phrase, and what you learned. This active reflection genuinely reinforces your learning. All right, let's wrap up this incredibly detailed masterclass. Today, we covered a full spectrum of polite communication in English, from softening your opinions to handling disagreements gracefully and constructively, to utilizing the subtle yet powerful impact of modal verbs and softening adverbs, and finally, leveraging your tone, intonation, and body language effectively to convey your message. I truly hope that after this comprehensive deep dive, you now feel more confident, more equipped, and profoundly more empowered to express yourself in English. Not just clearly, but kindly, respectfully, and with genuine impact and confidence, too. Think of a real situation. It could be a scenario at work, a personal conversation, an online discussion forum you participate in, or even a recurring debate you have in your own head. Identify a specific opinion you want to share in that scenario, particularly one where you might anticipate a differing viewpoint or potential disagreement. Your task is to plan ahead and consciously use at least 3 to 5 of the strategies from this episode. Choose a variety. Maybe one phrase for introducing your opinion gently, one for polite disagreement, and one involving a modal verb to soften your stance. Really focus on applying them deliberately and thoughtfully as you construct your thoughts. Then, if it's a real-life scenario, observe what happens during the conversation.